Hello again and welcome to The Luxury Choice, a B2B sales and business podcast brought to you by the training team of George James Limited. My name is Steve Vaughan. I'm a senior sales trainer at George James, as well as the host and producer of this podcast. Today's topic is all about closing, and I've got my colleague Prue Layton with me today, and it's just you and I today, Prue, no Jonathan.
Weird, isn't it?
It is a bit weird, yeah. However, we're going to cope.
We'll manage, just.
We should point out Jonathan is running a training program today, so isn't available. But I'm sure he's super busy. So the world of closing, it's a thing that salespeople and sales managers talk about, and sales trainers talk about. And there's a whole methodology called always be closing, which I'm sure we'll come on to.
Yeah.
But let's wind it right back to the start. And by the way, this is going to be an interactive one. I'm not going to interview you, this Prue. You can ask me stuff as much as I'll ask you stuff, but. What do we mean by closing? It should be an obvious thing for a salesperson, but just in case, what do we mean by closing?
Closing is something I guess if we think of it in a pure way, closing is the thing that we do right at the very end of the sale when we close the customers in front of us to agree to place the order with us. Yeah. But I do think it's got a slightly broader what's the word I'm looking for? A slightly broader impact across, all of sales activities in terms of it. But I think, if you look at classically in sales speak, what's closing? It's asking for the order.
Yeah. Yeah, it's that movie, isn't it? Glengarry, Glen Ross, isn't it? Coffees for Closers.
Yeah.
What do you think? Yeah. Look it up if you don't know what I'm talking about, listener, but it's a classic movie about estate agents in New York in the 90s or even the 80s.
It's probably the 80s. The fashion was shocking.
Go and check my wardrobe now. So I guess we always think about closing as being, as you say, asking for the order. But to me, and I'd like your thoughts on this, but to me, it's not just about the final step, of course, getting the order and walking out with the order. Woohoo, it's the best part of being in sales, of course it is. But it's as you alluded to, it's also earlier in the sales process, it's kind of agreeing what's going to happen next, really. Is that another way of looking at it?
Yeah, I think absolutely, Steve. It's about commitment. I think if we look at selling in the space that we operate in, we're looking for continual commitment to the next step. I think if you look at sort of the cheesy version of sales, you do everything in 5 minutes by applying a few pressure tactics, closing by confusing the person in front of you and getting them to agree something. And it's really clear that's not the environment we operate in. I don't think any of our listeners will win deals on the initial visit they have or contact they have with anybody. We've talked in previous podcasts about developing rapport and relationships with customers. So I think after every connection or contact we have with customers, we go for a bit of a close, don't we? A bit of a commitment to the next step, a bit of what's going to happen next. So I think it's an ongoing thing, really. I
don't think it always happens, though. I've been in sales calls as a sales manager. I've probably done it myself, where we're just kind of floating at the end of the call, really, and nothing seems to be agreed, and there's no obvious way forward, yeah?
Oh, I have certainly felt, well, it's pretty obvious, isn't it? If it's obvious to me in my head, it must be obvious to the customer, but never actually verbalise what's obvious. And it's very interesting, probably if you ask two people who left the sales call, ask the customer and the salesperson about what was actually happening next. If it hasn't been spoken about and agreed, they might have very different points of view.
Yeah. I thought we were doing this and we're actually doing this. Yeah, completely. Yeah.
So I see a lot of stuff where there's nice conversations, but everything's left a bit hanging and a bit sort of overly, I don't know, nothing's agreed. It's felt implied, but not agreed.
And Jonathan, who isn't here, I know what he would say here at this stage is, great salespeople have a healthy obsession for what happens next or the next step, really.
Yeah.
And I think that's true because to me, there's always a next step in any customer interaction. If it is go away and never come and see me again, I'm never going to be your customer ever, ever, ever. At least we know. But there is always should always be a next step, which is come and see me in 12 months, or we're going to arrange a demonstration, or whatever. And that's closing, isn't it, really? Yeah.
It is. It's closing to the next step. It's commitment to the next step. I mean, we've spoken a few times, I think, about sales process, the whole idea of, what is a sales process? And one of the things that's helpful in the sales process is we know where we're trying to get to. So we always want to see if we can get to the next step. There's the customer's decision-making or buying process that we're trying to align with. And all of these, are all about a journey to a destination, which is done in stages, which requires agreement. Are we both on the same page? Are we happy to move forward to the next step? And I think that's what closing is.
Right. No, I agree. And again, as you say, all these things linked together, thinking about the session we did on, or the podcast we did on objection handling, if the customer's not happy to move to the next step, there's probably a concern there or objection that we haven't uncovered. And of course, we've talked about that, haven't we, really? So why do you think salespeople don't agree the next step? What stops them doing it? Do they just forget, or is there something else there?
I think sometimes they don't think about it. There's several reasons. Salespeople, they have happy ears. We've all used that phrase where...
Tell me more, just in case.
So salespeople, we tend to be optimistic. We tend to like good news. That's what we sort of listen out for. Sometimes we actually channel out negative stuff and don't explore it. But in terms of getting commitment at the end of it, the worry is as a salesperson is that the customer might not be ready to agree to what you want them to agree to, particularly if you're working to an internal timeline, quarter end, year end. You've made a forecast and you hope it comes in time. So we have our own expectations, and what we don't want to hear is, no, I'm not ready, or no, not yet. And that can be a worry. So we may avoid asking for the commitment because we don't want to hear bad news. We only want to hear good news.
So we're kind of kidding ourselves almost in that respect. So it's I guess it comes from the pressures of our own organisation with our targets and our forecasts and all those things. We hear what we want to hear and jump to the conclusion that we want to jump to because it fits all of those things, our forecast, our target expectations or whatever. And sometimes we just don't understand really where we're really at.
No.
So those happy years, you just say, yeah, that makes sense. I've not thought of it that way before, actually.
A natural optimism.
Yeah, unless you're an Aston Villa supporter like me, but that's still.
Yeah, I think that it can feel, I guess the other thing it can feel is a little challenging to the customer. So we might hear something we didn't want to hear. So if it's left unsaid, then I didn't hear it, so it's not real. And I think, actually getting the customer to go, this is what we're going to do next, this is when we're going to do it, and this is why, can feel a little strong sometimes or a little pushy. Right. And I'm sure you've had the same. A lot of salespeople, particularly new to the role that I speak to, say, I don't want to be too salesy. I don't want to come over as too salesy. I'm from a strong academic background. I'm technically great, and I don't want to appear salesy. And if there's one thing that people think is salesy, it's closing.
Yeah, but just to sort of push back on that a little bit, you're employed as a salesperson. Closing the job title, isn't it, guys? So yeah, you might have all the PhDs and degrees or whatever, and of course that gets you the credibility and the ability to understand the products and credibility in front of the customer. But we are salespeople, guys. That's our job. So I think if we were to go, as you said, we were going to see a customer and say, "Hey, my name's Steve. Do you want to buy £1 million spectrometer?" Then that would be, But I think going through the process, we've talked at length now on these podcasts about sales process. If we do that properly and take the customer with us and agree next step as we go along, to me, and I'd like your thoughts on this, to me, when we do get to the stage of actually, are you going to buy it? It's kind of like the obvious thing to ask almost.
Yes, it is. I think that it's the customer knows why you're there. You know, when I have these discussions sometimes with people that say, oh, well, I say, but the customer does know why you're there. You know, it is pretty clear that you represent your organisation. The customer is evaluating options in terms of what they're going to buy next. It's not going to be a surprise that you would quite like them to buy from you. So we're not really, we're not doing this in stealth mode.
No.
And, you know, I was sort of reflecting. I did one of these sessions last week, actually, reflecting on what I shared there with the team there. It's sometimes customers are waiting for you to do it. I've definitely observed that, where the customer's ready to commit. Okay, they're happy. They're happy with everything that's in front of them. Everything fits, and they're almost waiting for the salesperson to say, are you happy to go ahead and place the order with me? But the salesperson is building up the value and building up the reasons. And
time to stop selling, guys.
Yeah, stop selling, ask for the order.
Yeah, and I think that, I mean, there's a bit of experience there, isn't there? You know, you and I have been doing this for a long time, so there's a bit of experience there where you know it's kind of the right time. But it's also recognising what we call buying signals, isn't it, really? When the customers are making those positive noises, really, like, it says things like, you know, well, what is your T's and C's again? You know, what's the lead time? Is that your best price?
Yeah.
Those are kind of indications, I think, that the customer's in frame of mind where he's probably going to be ready to buy it from you. Do you agree with me on that?
I absolutely agree. I think, you know, we've, at the point at which the customer is asking some of those details, which are about him checking through his or her commitment, it's like, okay, well, yeah, that looks like it's a good fit. Now let me sort some of the finer details out. You know, can I just check what the T's and C's are? No one asks to check your T's and C's if they don't want to buy from you.
Why bother? Exactly. Yeah.
You know, and, you know, as we know, in terms of objection handling, you know, can I have a discount? It's a buying signal. We don't ask for a discount off something that we wouldn't quite like to buy.
Exactly.
So the customer's indicating to you by asking any of those questions, I'm actually ready to commit. I'm ready to finally decide where I want to go.
Right.
And if you think about the customer psychology in this instance, the customer's been on an evaluation journey, weighing ups and downs, compromises, you know, what would I like to have? What can I have? And it's very natural before you make that final decision just to do a bit of checking. So can you, Steve, you know, can I just check, you know, when we spoke about this, you know, it's going to take 2 days to set up. Is that right? You know, what I'm saying is just reassure me, Steve, that I've made this decision, and I just want you to reassure me that I haven't missed anything out here. So whenever customers do that, and you can see them do this, they're just doing their own little checklist. Is that right? Is that right? Is that right? They're saying, I'm ready to say yes. So please, listeners, don't disappoint them. Ask them. They're ready to say yes.
And I think sometimes we're just afraid to ask that question because we're afraid of getting the word no, I think.
Yeah.
But, you know, we can live with that. If the customer says, no, I'm really sorry, we're not going to buy from you, we're going to buy from the other guys. You know, we placed the order already. Well, at least we know. And if it's no, I've still got a concern, then, you know, if you've been following us on the journey, to use a phrase I hate, with the podcast, you know how to handle those now, or if you've been in that training on that, you know.
Yeah, there can be all sorts of things behind that no. And I would be surprised if you got to this stage that it was a no, I'm definitely not buying from you. I think if you did, you'd probably have an inkling, to be honest. You know, everyone who's in a sales role has sort of a high degree of emotional intelligence. We learn to read people, and
hopefully,
yeah. So I think when I've actually asked, I think it's rarely been no. I was never going to buy from you. I've never heard that phrase. I've heard no.
I just thought I'd waste your time for 2 hours or something.
I've heard no, and of course, it can be what kind of no. But I think one of the things we have to do when we ask for the order is we have to learn to use that golden silence as well. You know, one of the things is to ask and then be quiet. Just give it a moment, because I've seen sort of panic, and I'm sure I've done it as well, where I've said, are you happy to go ahead and place the order with me? Because just to remind you, and then I start, you did say this, and we did agree that, and this would really work for you, and this would, it's like, just ask and shh.
Ask and you will receive. I think there's some great points there, and I just want to come back to my own personal sales career, and I think I've mentioned this to you. I think I've mentioned this on the podcast before, but my first sales job, so I was a research chemist for ICI a couple of years when I left for uni way back in the mid-'80s. So yes, I am that old listener. But my first sales job was selling water treatment chemicals in central London. I won't name the company. It was in the sort of mid to late 80s. It was this height of the yuppie boom, and filofaxes and mobile phones that looked like bricks and all that stuff. Yeah. And I was given this book, and it was called 50 Great Closes. And you go through it, and there was a half Nelson close, the full Nelson close, the puppy dog close, the crowbar close, you name it. I can't remember all of them really. And to me, with the experience I now have, 30 odd years of sales and sales management, they were all nonsense really. Because I don't think you can, through clever words or clever spiel, we're not Arthur Daly selling used cars. We can't convince people to buy something that they don't want to buy.
No.
We just help them make the final decision. That's kind of what we're saying, I think, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, those closes are about exploiting vulnerable people, to be perfectly honest.
Right.
If you look at the places that they're used, it's actually confusing people, and then just sort of that manipulative side, that poor side of selling that doesn't take place in this environment at all. Yeah, they're all nonsense. I mean, I guess the only one that sort of works is what I always fondly call the puppy dog close.
Tell me more then. Jonathan mentioned this on a podcast before, but remind me and the listener what the puppy dog close is.
So the puppy dog close is based on the fact that if you're a child and you want a puppy, and you make your parents take you to the pet shop, and the person who owns the pet shop can see that the parents are a bit reluctant. They say, well, look, why don't you just take the puppy home for a few days and see how you get on, knowing fully that the puppy's never coming back.
Yes.
And I think, I've definitely done this in terms of being successful in selling. If you sell equipment, it's like, okay, well, let's not go for the full commitment to buy. Yeah. Why don't you have it for a week? See how it goes. I'll see how you're going on with it, how you're doing. And the idea is that if the customer starts using a much better solution than they currently have, they'll be very reluctant to live without that solution. So it's the closest I can think of in terms of that loner, try it out, see how it goes. And that can be effective sometimes, I think, with customers who are not sure.
I think it can. I've also seen it work really badly as well, because I think, and I think it's because looking back on it, and I've done this loads of times, we're probably at the wrong stage in the sales process. The customer's still evaluating options rather than, almost at the stage where you're the preferred option. They just need a bit more encouragement. And, often I've lent customers everything from a balance through to quite a sophisticated piece of technology, and just left it on the bench and then come back a week later and nobody's used it. Because it's, particularly the lab staff, they're going to look at it and say, oh, what's that? I don't know how to use that. I'm going to carry on using the one I've always used because I know how to use it. And then it becomes almost an anti-selling technique. Look, it's a bit too complicated, Steve. Have we got a simpler one, or we've got to stick with the one we've got?
Yeah, it's it works if there's a real pull from the customer in terms of you trying to go, I know how to get them convinced. I'll offer them a loaner. But if the customer's sort of pulling at you, and they have a commitment to use it and a strong requirement, then it can work. But I think mostly we just have to ask. It's no more complicated than knowing the customer's ready to make a commitment mentally. You've seen some things from the customers we just spoke about. thinking about what it's going to be like to have your solution in their space. What's your training like? What's the shelf life? Can I just go through the delivery? What are the T's and C's? All of those lovely things you hear from a customer, which are indicating to you, I'm imagining having this, and now I just want the fine details.
That's it. They're processing in their mind a world with your product or in their world, really. One thing that you do really well on the training that we've been recently running together with a large global company is around closing it, and you've just done it really, is the one closing technique I do subscribe to, which is the S staircase.
Yeah, yes.
Or a summary close is another way of looking at it, really. And that's where we say, so Prue, just to recap, you said you're happy with the specification and performance of the instrument. You like the way that it works, the ease of use, the T's and C's we've agreed. We've got the availability of stock, and we can meet your expectations there. It's going to fit on your bench correctly, and all the time you're nodding at me while you're saying that. So if you're watching this on video, guys, you can see Prue nodding. And then the obvious thing is to say, so are you happy to go ahead on that basis? And all the time the customer's going, yep, no, that's fine, yep. And that, to me, that's the only closing technique that I've ever really subscribed to, really. And you cover it really well on the training course.
Yeah, I think it's just about, it's quite, you're asking the customer to check off that they're happy with everything. And so when you ask for the final yes, it's actually, they've already done their you've got them to verbalise their mental checklist. So by taking a little bit of control and going through all the things they're happy with, you're helping them go satisfied. No, this is the right decision. Yeah, of course I'm happy to go ahead. So I think that's what you're doing. You're walking them through all the right things.
And again, just to recap, if the customer says no at any stage during that summary, what do we do then?
That's an objection, isn't it? So it sounds like you've got a concern there, Steve.
Yeah. What concern do you have?
What is it? What is it you're concerned about? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. So we've talked about why closing isn't necessarily just about getting the order, though often, it is, but it's agreeing the next step. And we've looked at perhaps, why the customer might be expecting us to take that control and make that movement and make that agreement. And we've also looked at some ways to do it. What kind of things go wrong, though? What can go wrong when we say to the customer, are you happy to buy from me?
I think if we ask at the wrong time,
okay,
and we ask the wrong person.
That's a good one. Yeah.
So sometimes we may ask somebody to give a commitment to buy, and actually they don't have the authority, as we would say. They don't have the authority to give the final yes. Okay. So one of the reasons that you may get hesitation or a little bit of concern is because actually you're asking for the final commitment from somebody who can't give it to you.
So they're part of the decision-making unit, but they're not the final decision maker. Okay.
And perhaps you haven't found out just till then. Perhaps even they've implied that they are, but when you go for the final yes, there's suddenly they're an influencer, they're a decision maker, they're a stakeholder, all the terms that we can use to say that they are, that they are important, but they don't have the ability to say the final yes. And you may find that that could go wrong.
Yeah. And I think that's strategic selling almost, which is another topic for another day, really. But yes, if we don't understand the organisation that we're doing business with and where the people fit in, because very rarely when we're selling the kind of products our listeners sell, very rarely is there one person involved in the decision. There's not one, isn't there? Yeah. Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah. What else could go wrong, though?
I guess what else could go wrong?
I can think of some great examples where I've been with sales managers, and I know you've got the same stories. I've been with salespeople, should I say, as a sales manager, and the salesperson, I'm sitting next to the salesperson said, are you going to buy it yet then, or are you happy to go ahead? And the customer says, yeah, I think so. And the salesperson goes, oh, thank goodness for that. Oh, that's great news, because we thought you were going to bring up the other guys, and actually we could have given you 10% more discount if you'd asked for it. And I'm going, stop, and I'm trying to kick them under the table. And I'm not exaggerating, dear listener. I have been in calls when this kind of thing has happened.
No, I actually, I had a customer who used to be my customer, and then I got the management role and had somebody who was the local salesperson, and that absolutely happened. And I think it was probably the first time. There's probably a bit of pressure having a manager with you.
Of course.
There was a bit of pressure because the outcome, the objective of the call was to ask for the order. So I appreciate the salesperson was under a bit of pressure. But he did actually, he said, "Oh, are you happy? Are you going to place the order?" And the customer said, yeah, I'm really happy with it. And this particular salesperson said, "Oh, right." And then started sharing some features of the competitor system, because I'd suggested he might sort of review what could be a potential objection, because we knew who else the customer was looking at. So I did look at the customer and I said, "Thank you very much. Really appreciate you placing the business with us. If you hear any screaming from the car park after we've left, you'll know why."
Love it. So,
but yeah, that also can happen. I think sometimes we get a yes from the customer, and then we almost talk ourselves out of the sale.
Absolutely.
We may relax and start to sort of voice things that we were worried that would come up and didn't, or we can start laying on additional value and start to confuse the customer. So the moral of this story, listener, is when the customer says yes, thank the customer and leave as fast as you can. Get out.
Yeah, I don't mean head for the hills and Scarpa and never come back again, but
no,
yeah, thank the customer. And then if there is some things that need to happen after that, just agree what's going to happen next. So the next step will be that we'll get in contact to arrange, a pre-sale site survey and all that stuff. Yeah, but yeah, stop selling is the key, the key message really, because you've got the deal. Yeah, and I want to come back to something that you said right at the get-go of this podcast actually as well, and I think it's super important, Prue. When you said about when we asked for the order, you said it's just as simple as asking the customer if you're going to buy it from me. And I think that's super important for people, particularly new salespeople, to understand. Yes, you work for a company. Yes, you're doing business-to-business sales, but you're selling on a one-to-one basis. And the customer is placing their business and their trust with you, the salesperson. And I think that's a really important point.
Yeah, I absolutely concur. I think, we know that this is a people-to-people business.
Absolutely.
People buy from people. Of course, you have to work for a company that has great products and a good reputation, and they're all important. But the reason that we have salespeople and the people that listen to this podcast is because we make the difference. Absolutely. We make the difference in terms of getting customers to place business with us. So I think it's important when you're closing the deal is to start talking about you and me. It's quite a personal decision, and I think it is. The customer's going, "I trust you. I'm happy to work with you." So ask them if they're happy to place the business with you, but make sure that your closing line is really short and simple. I think that's the other thing perhaps we should mention. It's, you and I use the same line all the time, I think, and you can tell that that's how we've done it. It's like, mine is, "Are you happy to go ahead and place the business with me?" And that is always what I say. I don't vary it. There's no reason to vary it. No. That line, please take that line if you think it'll work for you. However, if it's not something that sits naturally with the way that you speak, think of something that's short and simple and direct that works for you. And when it works, and it works for you, don't mess with it. Stick with it.
Yeah, use your own words. That's why I believe, the book of 50 Great Closes is nonsense. Use the words that work for you. For me, it might just be, so what happens next? So what would you like to do next? So where do we go from here? Depending if we're not asking for the order, we're asking for a commitment for the next step.
Yeah.
But it doesn't have to be some clever spiel. In fact, it shouldn't be, should it really? But your own words are crucial. I totally agree with that.
Yeah, if you have you will have had conversations with the customer up till then. So Why would you start talking weird right at the end? I mean, you'll really throw the customer if you have some weird line that doesn't sound like you. They'll be like, what happened? So it should be your personality. I don't know, we haven't spoken about today, but I think that one of the things that we have to be is authentic. We have to be authentic. We have to be our authentic selves in front of customers.
I think that's super important. Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
To some degree, when you're selling, you do take on some sort of persona, I think, but it has to be the real you underneath that. Yeah. Really, if you're trying to be something you're not, if you're trying to be somebody from Glengarry, Glen Ross, it's not you. It's not the real person. Customers will just see that lack of consistency and authenticity, without doubt. Yeah.
I think it would. They may not be able to understand, but you'll make them feel uncomfortable. And if you're asking someone to make a commitment, the last thing you need to do is to make them feel uncomfortable. You need to make them feel relaxed, and this feels like the natural next step.
Yeah, completely.
Yeah.
So, Prue, it's been a good discussion. We've gone through sort of half an hour of that, really. Is there anything else on closing we haven't covered, or anything else you think the listener needs to be aware of?
I think we've spoken about the kind of ultimate close at the end, and I think these things apply at the end of every contact. We mentioned it right at the beginning, Steve, about getting those little commitments. And I think it's really important that we never leave a connection or a contact with a customer without agreement about, what's going to happen next, when should that happen, and who should be involved. Yeah, and I think if you do that at the end of every contact you have with a customer, you will sort of move along together. You're both sort of taking these steps together, and that's much more collaborative. It's much more consultative, and it's much more comfortable both sides. So, yeah, use this technique every time you connect with anybody, I think.
Great advice. Thanks very much, Prue. If you've enjoyed today's show, then don't forget to subscribe to the podcast in your favourite podcast app, and tell your friends and colleagues all about the show, of course. Also, we would love you to leave us a review on Apple or Spotify. It does help us in lots of mysterious ways. And if you do want to contact the show, ask a question, or even disagree with something that we've said, you can now use the contact the show option in the show notes. That sends a text message, comes through to me. We'll be very happy to reply. Or you can email the team at podcast, capital P, at georgejames-training.com. That's podcast, capital P, at georgejamestraining.com. And there's a hyphen there, georgejames-training.com. I'll be back again in 2 weeks' time with another special guest interview. Until then, folks, happy selling. I will talk to you soon.